right, back again on the Prima-Donns.
We promised.
A word from Crusher Kowalski, one of our favorite guests.
Yes, and we promised. Mr. Glen Sonmor, former coach of the Minnesota North Stars.
Pleasure,
guys.
having you,
Nice. Very nice to be here.
Thank you very much, Coach. How are you doing today?
Just great. Thank you.
All right, you ready to talk some hockey?
Sure. Always ready to talk hockey.
I thought you might be. We thought you might be. Well, why don't we start out with when you were growing up? Did you grow up you were born in Moose Jaw, is that correct?
Yeah. But I grew up down we moved down east when I was about 4 or 5. So I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, which is really, it's Canada's Pittsburgh, right near Toronto, and that's where I went to high school. And I guess you consider that your hometown. So I consider Hamilton my hometown, yeah.
Okay. And did you play youth hockey and everything too?
Well, yeah, the Canadian system there, there wasn't any high school hockey. We played bantam and midget, but, like most kids, and I was a sports were my whole life, so I played basketball, football, baseball, and hockey too. And but like most Canadian kids, if you're going to have a chance to play beyond, hockey was going to be your best bet. Right. So eventually, I went into junior hockey and a year in Brandon, Manitoba, and then Minneapolis was the first place I came to play minor professional hockey. 1949-50, where I met John Maruchi.
Okay. Now, when you were playing hockey, youth hockey, and that. Did you have was there a specific player that you sort of idolized that made you maybe want to turn pro, or made you really somebody you idolized as a kid?
Yeah, I think, Don, when I think back, we always pick the greatest player, and I always kid about this. I had trouble. Rocket Richard was and he was getting a little later in his career. I did get to play against him just a little, but he was the guy that I think most Canadian kids. And I went from Rocket Richard to Gordie Howe to Bobby Orr to Wayne Gretzky, trying to. Although I still hold that I think Gordie Howe was the greatest that I ever saw or played against.
Well, I'll take care of my one question later.
Gordie Howe.
Yep. Now, let's go to your. Talk about how you got your first coaching job. Was that at Ohio State? Was your first head coaching job?
Other than I had been teaching in my hometown in Canada. What happened to me, guys, was I had made the connection with John Maruchi. He had me going to summer school, and then when my career ended when I was 25, when I lost the eye, and I came back here. So my really first coaching job was a freshman coach at the University of Minnesota in 1956. Okay. Herbie Brooks was on that team. Then I didn't know what I wanted to do, so this had happened so abruptly. I was preparing to be a teacher, but I wasn't quite ready to. So I kicked around with a junior team in Canada, a Springfield team with Eddie Shore, the infamous Eddie Shore's team.
We'll ask you about him in a minute.
And then I went to high school in my hometown, and I taught and coached there for about 6 years. Okay. And while I was going to summer school at Ohio State, and then they said, why don't you come down here, coach our hockey team, and finish up your degree work. So I did that. And then John Maruchi was leaving the Gophers. By then, John was coach of the Gophers. He was leaving the Gophers to join the North Stars in '66, and he got me the job at the University of Minnesota. Okay. So that's how all that happened.
Okay. Now, I just want to backtrack for 1 second. I did find out that you played parts of 2 seasons with the Rangers. Is that correct? Yeah. And you played in 28 games. You had a couple of goals. You had 21 penalty minutes. Now, to my addition,
21 penalty minutes.
That would
28
be
games.
Right. Something tells me it was a 5-minute major. In
yeah,
there
those in those days when we didn't get the kind of penalty minutes you have now, and I was there as a there was a little guy named Wally Hergesheimer who I'd played with here in Minneapolis and also in Cleveland, where I played most of my minor pro. And I kind of took care of Hergy. It's funny to see him. I was 180 pounds or so, and I was like an enforcer. If anybody fooled around with Hergy, I could fight. And that's why Maruch liked me when he discovered I could fight. But so I got my chance with the Rangers. The interesting things there, guys, I was traded for Andy Bathgate. Now, how's that? That's the way they announced it. It wasn't. The Rangers were going to take a look at me, and Bathgate was about 19 then. They let him go to Cleveland for a little while they he was not really traded, but they had to make some kind of an announcement, so I've got that claim. But
that sounds good to
yes, it was. So yeah, I did it, and I did get in one brawl in New York that Stan Fischler still talks about. They had a guy, I'd been there just a couple of games and I hadn't done anything, and I knew I'd better make some kind of impression. So I said to Harry Howell, who was from my hometown and we were playing with, I said, Harry, if I want to grab somebody, who should I grab? And he said, grab that Marty Pavlich. He's a pain in the neck anyway. So he was playing with Detroit. I grabbed him and spun him around. And he didn't know what was coming off. And I landed one, and he went down. And the Rangers were not very good teams then, and that there was something to get excited about. And it kept me there a little bit longer. The fact Fischler said it was the cleanest knockout they'd had in the Garden since I forget who, Lewis and somebody.
All right. That sounds good to me. Well, then why don't we jump up to your days at University of Minnesota? Why don't you talk about some of the players that you coached there that stick out in your memory, some of your favorites?
Yeah, well, we all have our favorites, I think, guys. My favorite player that I was ever associated with all the time was Mike Antonovich at the University of Minnesota. He was, and that was partly because he helped turn the program. We were struggling. Although we had a great Canadian goalkeeper named Murray McLaughlin in those early years. He won the WCHA Most Valuable Player twice. But Mike Antonovich came the first year that freshmen were made eligible to play. Mike was a freshman, and we went from last in the WCHA to first in 1 year. Between Murray McLaughlin and Mike Antonovich but we had a lot of good players. Dean Blaze was on that team, the coach at North Dakota. We had some great players from here. We had the Peltier brothers from Johnson, and Craig Sarner made a real good line. And that one team in '71 did go to the national finals, where we lost out to Boston University in the championship game. We had some great players on those teams. Pat Westrom, whose boy Eric is going to be a Gopher next year. Right. That's where I'm getting to feel old, guys. Now my players' kids are. But those were some very, very happy times. We had some great kids on that. But Antonovich stuck out among the ones that I've had. Yeah.
And how about did Bill Butters?
Yeah, those are my two favorites, and still are. Billy Butters, Mike Antonovich, and the Pat Westrom kid was a special. They were special kind of. Billy Butters was one of the fiercest competitors I've ever seen, and he wasn't as gifted as someone say as Antonovich, but he made himself a tremendous factor on any team he was ever on.
All right.
What about Coach? You followed John Maruchi then as coach of the.
Yeah, what I always say, Don, is
Coach Maruchi.
Yeah, my claim to fame as a Gopher coach is I was between Maruchi and Brooks. That's a great John Maruchi was a great influence in my life, and a great influence and a factor for every kid here in this state that's playing hockey now. John Maruchi was, and we always kid about this, that I came with that Canadian background, and I landed here in '56 and watched what was going on just that 1 year I was here. And believe me, guys, they had some big, tough teams come in here. The thing back in Canada then was when you got out of a junior and you were 21, you went and played senior a couple of years to see if you were going to, or maybe, if you played pro, they wouldn't let you. But you could play what they called senior hockey up there, which was pro. So some of them would come to school here at 23, 24 years old as freshmen. And that's what, without going into all the disputes Maruch had with, people said he was anti-Canadian. He wasn't anti-Canadian, but he was anti having 24-year-old freshmen playing against 18-year-old freshmen.
Right.
And he was telling me he was going to go with the Minnesota kids, and I was telling him then, no, you can't, John. You're not. And he'd say, oh, yes, we can, Glenn, and we're going to find out. If we don't, nothing is ever going to happen. And that's why I say the hockey program in Minnesota is definitely indebted completely to John Maruchi.
I can believe that. Well, how about if we take a short break, maybe go to a PSA?
Take a short PSA.
And when we come back, we'll talk about the Minnesota Fighting Saints, the Birmingham Bulls, and much more. And we'll be back with Coach Glen Sonmor right after.
Don't touch the dial.
Don't touch the dial.
Stay right here.
Don't touch the dial.